Welcome to another episode of Group Therapy. This is your proprietor, Tony Ortega, and I'm joined by a very special guest tonight. It's just going to be me and Alex Barnes-Ross over there in England. How are you, Alex?
I'm good, thanks. Do you like my t-shirt?
Oh, that's good.
And I thought, considering it's L. Ron Hubbard's birthday, and we've got all these Scientologists filing into Ruth Eckert Hall, I brought a little party blower so we can say happy birthday to Ron.
Well, as you can see, it's a different setup this week, folks. We're experimenting with Substack's live video feature. I don't know how it's going to go. We'll have the whole group back next week, but this week we're going to do something special. Just me and Alex. We're going to yap our lips and talk about all kinds of crazy stuff about Scientology for a while. But yeah, the big thing is it's L. Ron Hubbard's 114th birthday. I'm excited. I always like L. Ron Hubbard's birthday. I think all kinds of crazy stuff happens. But my first question for you, Alex, is this. I have a certain understanding of L. Ron Hubbard's life because I've read several books about it. It's something that I've been really interested for years. But let me ask you, when you were on staff in London, and this was a group that really revered this guy, what was your awareness of his biography, of his life events when you were actually working in the org?
Yeah. L. Ron Hubbard is considered man's greatest, best friend, right? And so I would take people on tours around the Public Information Centre at London Org, and we'd have all these panels, and there was a whole section dedicated to L. Ron Hubbard's life. And I'm going to be honest with you, I thought it was so extensive, the number of accomplishments and achievements that this man has, done in his life. I never really took the time to delve into and learn his entire story from start to finish. I only knew the important bits, or I would talk about, how he was an explorer or how he was in the Navy or whatever. So, but I never kind of sat down and read his biography. But I always considered it to be quite, what's the word? Inflated, right? Even when I was in Scientology, there was an element of me that thought, this guy's achieved a lot. I wonder how much of this is puffery. I'm sure he was actually in the Navy, but was he really as high up as he says he was? I guess he was an explorer, but was he really, a Boy Scout, leader or whatever it was? But he was, promoted to the top. I just wondered how much of it was actually true. But there was a part of me that thought it kind of doesn't matter. The point is, this guy has done great things, and if some things are slightly inflated, it doesn't matter. He's got all of this experience that he has used to then create this, thing that is going to help mankind. And that's what I was focused on in Scientology. I always tied it back to that.
Right? But you're saying that even when you were there working those long hours, you still had some of these doubts about who this guy was?
Yeah, I wouldn't say there were doubts. I never was completely 100% convinced of his story, but it wasn't like I was sat there thinking, he's lying about anything. I just thought maybe it was inflated. When he said that he was, was it like he was given this honor from a Native American tribe or something? And that story in particular, I remember thinking, look, in my head, what actually probably happened was this Native American leader of this tribe saw this kid and said, "Oh, you're one of our blood brothers," as a nice little thing that trying to make his day. And now that's been inflated into this big story of how he was the first blood brother and all of this. So that was what I mean about the puffery. It's not that I didn't believe the story, but I just wondered how it was whether it was being presented in a way that made it sound more grand than it actually was. But ultimately, it doesn't matter. What's important is we're trying to clear the planet, and this guy was the smartest man on planet Earth.
Right. And now in a second, I'm gonna ask you about how that's changed since you left. But first, I want to answer Debbie's question. We're experimenting with Substack Live for the first time. And at this point, it only allows 2 hosts. So we've got this, only Alex and me from group therapy this week. We'll be back with the full group on our audio only podcast next week. But for tonight, you just got the 2 of us because that's all Substack's letting us do. But we're going to do the best we can. Okay, so Alex has just explained for L. Ron Hubbard's birthday that when he was a staffer at London Org, he had this understanding of L. Ron Hubbard's accomplishments, but some of them sounded a little bit questionable. Okay, now you left. You've been gone for a while, out for 10 years or something. I guess you've had a chance to look at Russell Miller and John Atack. Um, what are your thoughts about L. Ron Hubbard's biography today, looking back on what you knew about him before?
I think it couldn't be clearer that this man was a charlatan. He was a con man. And having spoken to a lot of people who were on the ship with L. Ron Hubbard, Danielle Chamberlain, Janice Gillum Grady, and many others, it's become very clear to me that L. Ron Hubbard was a great storyteller, right? He was this larger than life character with a booming voice, and he was able to captivate and capture a room with all his fantastical stories. And knowing that now, I think that puts a lot of things into context in regard to his story. He always had a story to tell, so it's always going to be better than the last story he told. It's always got to be bigger and larger and grander. And it's just so clear now that I know all of that, how much everything is inflated and how he was just trying to trick people. Stories like, for example, how he bought St. Hill Manor. I met someone, it was Neville Chamberlain's funeral the other day, and there was a little contingent of ex-Scientologists and a bunch of people I never met before who were, around in his day. And they were there when L. Ron Hubbard purchased St. Hill Manor. And the story is that he asked someone to borrow money to buy this building, bought the building in his own name and said, look, I'll pay you back. And then never paid the guy back and declared him. Right. And it's just a typical story of like, this is how L. Ron Hubbard worked. And those are the things that I had no idea about when I was in. But when you apply that not just to a story but to actual Scientology beliefs, the practice and the belief, it's really clear how it just keeps getting worse and worse because he always has to one up himself and everybody else. So the beliefs get more fantastical, they get more extreme, they get more totalitarian, and then you end up with this destructive organization that we have today.
And Freedom Medal winner, yes, you can drink during the live video. In fact, the more you drink, the better Alex and I will appear. So have at it. Um, yeah, I mean, there's so many things in L. Ron Hubbard's biography that are just astounding. What I really appreciated about Russell's book, Barefaced Messiah, is the way that each chapter, each part of the book, he sets up. Here's the myth. Here's what the church says. Now let's go back and look at what the record says, and it's so different. This is a guy that could never tell a straight story about himself and always aggrandized himself. But actually, he had some really fascinating relationships. I really appreciate the job that Chris Owen did writing about Ron and his parents, and I republished that this week for his birthday. Um, he had this guy had great parents. I mean, Harry Hubbard was this U.S. naval lieutenant who really cared about Ron. They both worshiped their son, and Ron just disappointed them turn after turn. And I just thought it was really interesting to see Chris explained how that was his first disconnection, was disconnecting from his own parents when they didn't like the way he was treating Polly and that kind of thing. So that's established something that, to this day, you're not going to see anything about Harry Hubbard or Ladora May or any of the wives or any of the children on Scientology's website. And this guy is supposed to be a model for what exactly? I mean, he was a disaster as a family man. But he was a good tall tale teller. I'll give him that.
Well, you know what? Just thinking about you mentioning Russell Miller there in Barefaced Messiah. I spoke to Russell Miller a few months ago and went out down to Brighton, had a coffee with him. Really, really great guy. And he told me, and this is hilarious. when he published that book and Scientology took him to court and tried to stop the publication of this book, Scientology's legal argument wasn't that what you're saying isn't true. They never denied anything that he put in that book. They were just trying to make the case, oh, you can't write that as defamation and blah, 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 it's harassment. They never denied that anything. So that book has been legally proven in court to be true. So all of this information about Hubbard being this con man, this charlatan, this, fraudster, is all in public record now, and it's been proven to be true. But obviously, Scientology will deny it. Now, coming on to his family, I think that was an interesting article that you published from Chris Owen. Hubbard was surrounded by suppressive people. Like, everybody that was close to him eventually got declared, or he disconnected from his family, and it just makes you stop and wonder. This is meant to be the top biggest OT man on planet Earth. Like, why couldn't he spot all of this suppression, and why is he pulling all this suppression in all the time? Like, I don't know any single human being apart from David Miscavige that has had so many close connections with SPs. What does that say about the tech?
Isn't that also such a sort of sad, bittersweet scene that Chris Owen paints of Harry Hubbard at what, 85? Was he that old, or was he 75? I don't remember. He decided he wanted to see Ron one last time, and so he traveled down to where the ship was in the Bahamas or Florida or something, and visited him there. And let me just read a couple lines from that, because I just find it really poignant description of that meeting between the two of them. Let's see if I can find it real quick here. Let's see.
I'm just looking at the live chat as well. Hi, Phil Jones. Hi, Donna. Thank you for joining.
Come on, Tony, you can find this. Okay. Although Hubbard does not appear to have made any effort to seek out his father, Harry sought a reconciliation with his estranged son in 1975. He made a surprise visit to Hubbard in the Caribbean island of St. Vincent, where the Sea Org ship Apollo was docked at the time. The 88-year-old Harry was by this time very frail and somewhat confused. Hubbard received him courteously enough, going ashore to meet him and bringing him aboard the Apollo. The Apollo's crew had been ordered to hide all evidence of Scientology, but Harry did not seem curious about it. Harry and Hubbard sat talking for hours and took a tour of the ship together. He was given a supply of beer and was taken out on a couple of fishing trips before returning home to Bremerton, Washington, where he had told Hubbard's Aunt Marnie that he had had a wonderful trip. And then he died a few months later. Oh, God, I don't know. Something about that's just really bittersweet.
I think what makes that story horrific is there are so many people who have left Scientology, who have been disconnected from their family because of the harmful practice of disconnection. And there is, these people never had, like Mike Rinder. I'm sure Mike and his kids that are still in the SEAL would have loved to have had the opportunity before Mike passed away to just reconnect and have a moment like that. That is what humanity is about. Like, everybody deserves that, no matter what happens in your life, who you've fallen out with, what the cause was. If you're towards the end of your life, I think it's only human to want to not even reconcile, but just have that opportunity to meet up one final time and have a good chat and whatever. And Hubbard here had the opportunity to do that with his dad, but he didn't afford that opportunity to literally anybody else, and that is disgusting.
Yeah, it is. That's terrible. Well, what else should we talk about Ron on his birthday? What are some of the other highlights of his life that we should highlight as he's turning 114?
we've got to celebrate him being kicked out of the UK and going on the ship because he was on the run, and the whole European story. Like, this is one thing I never knew when I was in Scientology. You know, the story I was told was he set up base in the UK at St. Hill. You know, it was expanding, it was huge, and then he wanted to go and do some more research and do it in a distraction-free environment, which is why he went onto the Apollo and set
That's
sail.
what they say it was for?
That's what I was told. Yeah, was because he needed a distraction-free environment where he could be on the open seas, where he's just surrounded by Sea Org members, and there's no distractions, so he can focus on the important work that is we now know as the operating Thetan levels. But actually, no, he was being chased out of the country on fraud charges, and he was kicked out and denied a visa. He was literally on the run. I never knew that when I was in.
Well, he had gone to Rhodesia, today's Zimbabwe, with thoughts of becoming prime minister and taking it over and making it the first Scientology country. And he had actually, set up shop there and had made some radio addresses there. Chris Owen, again, did a great job describing this whole period of his life. And they didn't want him there, basically kicked him out. He came back to the UK, and they didn't want him there. So, yeah, he had no choice. He had to go to sea. And he was trying to find places that they didn't know everything about him already. And it would drive him crazy that they'd go to some new port, but sooner or later, reports would trickle in from the United States and UK, and they'd have to leave again. That was his motivation for Snow White. He had, in 73, he had gone to the US to hide out while the ship was getting repairs, and he dreamed up this Snow White program where they were going to break into offices and find out what these governments had on him and try to destroy it. That was his whole plan for Snow White, because he couldn't sail ahead of these reports. And every port he went into, eventually it became sour. So such a bizarre thing that he actually ran Scientology for 6, 7 years from a ship. I mean, it is kind of I don't know, it's kind of amazing. I think it got old though.
Well, isn't it funny how history repeats itself? The story here is that Scientology would go into this port, establish a relationship, and then, quickly get turned away. And then they found it difficult, so they had to go to new ports in countries that had never heard of Scientology. That is exactly what Scientology are doing to this day. Look at their expansion into South America, into Asia. And when I was on staff in London, we would sell books in Arabic on Edgware Road deliberately to the population that don't speak English as a first language, because it's more likely they have no idea what Scientology or Dianetics is, because the reputation is so soured in the English speaking world. So the Scientology are doing exactly the same thing today as they were back then, just this time, instead of ships, it's multi-million-dollar ideal orgs in countries all over the world.
Yeah, and they are having some success. I mean, in places like Mexico and Taiwan, they do seem to have some life there, and people joining and people spending money. And they're really, David Miscavige is trying to take advantage of it in Mexico for sure. But that, that for Miscavige, it's much more important to have a big showing in the US and the UK. And it might help some things that he's doing well in Taiwan and Mexico, but that doesn't really help. I mean, he has to do well in the US, and he's not. I don't think he is.
Couldn't agree more. They're
Yeah.
certainly under fire, that's for sure.
Well, they certainly have a lot of litigation, and we had some litigation updates this week. The main one was that so Leah Remini filed her lawsuit against the Church of Scientology in 2023. Basically, she's suing over fair game. It's really the first lawsuit about fair game in a long, long time. And she's alleging that they're smearing her online all the time, and they're getting into her life and messing with her family, and also messing with the people she's trying to do business with. And that's what I thought was really important about her lawsuit, was she's trying to show that they are making it difficult for her to make a living. There's a material harm there, and that's important in law. So the Scientology tried to gut the lawsuit with these anti-slap motions and motions to strike. And the judge did agree with Scientology to a certain extent that some of the online smears of Leah were just opinion or were a little out of date, and he removed them. But, and this is so important, he kept 7 of 8 causes of action. Basically, she can still sue for almost everything she wants to sue over. That's why Scientology is so unhappy with this ruling and why they're appealing it. I know there was a couple of news organizations, a court news service, for example, that said that the judge had gutted her lawsuit. And I just don't, it's just not true. Scientology would not be fighting this hard if her lawsuit had been ruined. It wasn't. And so now they had the Scientology appealing that preliminary ruling. Took them a year. We finally got their appeal brief. It was real smeary and nasty. And Texas Lawyer wrote about that last week. But they also filed another one. And that's what we got a hold of this week was the joinder submitted by RTC, Religious Technology Center, which is basically the entity that runs everything with David Miscavige as chairman of the board. This thing was a lot less smeary, Alex. It was more focused. I think partly because RTC wants to be seen as the more serious of those, right? Like they don't want to be seen as so crazy as the Church of Scientology International. Sorry, but then also, what they're really angry about was that I was in the courtroom. RTC said, "Hey, we shouldn't even be in this lawsuit." Leah Remini has alleged that she's being smeared, but she hasn't said who's doing it. RTC, CSI. She never even mentions RTC. We shouldn't be here. Well, the judge asked her about that. And so there was some argument back and forth. And then the judge gave Leah some time to add more allegations. What she did, she got 2 declarations, one from Mike Rinder and one from Claire Headley. They're fantastic, right? Both of them dealt with RTC. Both of them said with authority, Scientology is never going to smear someone like Leah Remini without the approval and direction of David Miscavige and RTC. And the judge said, okay, that's all you need. At this early part of the lawsuit, all you need to do is allege it. I mean, you're going to have to prove it once there's a trial and prove it to the satisfaction of a jury. But at this point, all you need is the allegation. And that's what he ruled. Well, RTC has been so hopping mad ever since then. They're so angry. And so that's what their filing was that I put up this week was they're basically just really angry that Mike Rinder and Claire Headley got to put in these declarations. And of course, they like to point out multiple times that Mike has died now and he's not going to be able to follow this up with testimony. So that's what that was about, Alex. And I guess my question for you is, if Mike can't testify about RTC, can you think of some other people that might be able to take his place and testify about how David Miscavige runs things?
I mean, absolutely. You could, if you ask any Scientologist, former or current, who the leader of Scientology is and who is currently in charge of running the ship, they will say David Miscavige. I mean, all you have to do is look on David Miscavige's own website, and there are dozens of video testimonials from various executives all over the world at different parts of the Scientology organization talking about David Miscavige's wonderful leadership and how it's because of him that Scientology is expanding, and he is personally in control and in charge of the whole program and expansion of this organization. There is ample evidence this man is the one who is calling the shots, and I just think it's outrageous that a court needs to see further evidence. Like, the evidence is clear as day. Like, it's an easy thing to prove. But obviously the legal system is they can't just take videos on a website, I'm sure, but anybody who worked in Scientology can testify to the fact that Miscavige is the leader. There's even all these videos of the IES event and L. Ron Hubbard's birthday. Miscavige walks out onto stage and talks about the job that he's been doing running the show. So absolutely, he and RTC are the ones responsible for the fair game attacks against Leah and everybody else.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, there are plenty of other people that served at that high level that I'm sure some of them can testify But I remember when Denise Brennan explained all this to me. I'm sad thinking about her passing away. But Denise was there in 1980, 81 when L. Ron Hubbard reorganized all this. And for this very specific reason. And, look, maybe it's just always going to work with American courts. But the way Denise explained it was, look, when Scientology gets sued by a former member, the obvious target is always going to be the Church of Scientology International. They will admit that they quote, run the orgs, okay? And we've seen it in these court cases where I think, was it Monique's case, where it was clear that they were getting close to getting Dave brought in on deposition, and CSI was just trying to fall on its sword time and time again. Judge, we'll take the hit. That's what CSI wants to do, to be there as the sort of like to accept all the attacks. Then you create behind it RTC. And so as Denise explained it, is okay, let's say that you do manage to sue CSI and really harm it very badly. You're going to have a harder time bringing RTC into the lawsuit because RTC is just going to say, we don't have anything to do with that. And it's designed that way, even if the chairman of the board of RTC, David Miscavige, actually runs everything. You're going to have a hard time. But let's say you do managed to prove to an American court that not only were these people harmed by CSI, but it was done at the direction of RTC and David Miscavige, and they should be in the lawsuit too. And you managed to get a gigantic penalty award and harm them. Then guess what? Even behind that is CST. And it says right there in the bylaws that if RTC is destroyed, CST can take back all the trademarks and copyrights. Ultimately, CST is the ultimate backstop. You can always rebuild from CST. And Denise was explaining all this to me, that they designed it this way. They knew what they were doing. Go ahead, sue CSI, sue RTC. You're never going to get to CST and the real things that matter. Scientology will always survive it. So we see it time and time again. They go into court and they say, Judge, David Miscavige is only the ecclesiastical leader of Scientology. He doesn't tell anybody to do anything. And I just wish, they put all their effort into these preliminary rulings because what Leah is doing is she's saying, okay, I've got the declarations. Let's do some depositions. Let's put it in front of a jury. But David Miscavige can never allow that to happen because he knows what a jury's going to conclude. A jury's not going to believe David Miscavige and the attorneys of the Church of Scientology. So that's why they fight so hard at this stage to keep it out of a courtroom and a jury. But I have a feeling that these same tricks are not going to work in England. It's been a while though since we've seen some litigation over there.
Yeah, I mean, the corporate structure of Scientology is set up exactly as you say. It's all about muddying the waters and avoiding and escaping accountability. And, for an organization that calls itself a church, which is supposedly for the public benefit, it is the least transparent organization I've ever come across. And, to your point about CST and RTC, all you have to do is look at any org board and you will see in any organization, Scientology building in the world, and there will be a reference to RTC on there, and it will show that RTC are the ultimate ones in control. CST is something I had never heard of until after I'd left Scientology. Church of Spiritual Technology, what the hell are you talking about? I always thought RTC was the top. And the fact that CST is not talked about inside Scientology, you only know about it if you're at the upper echelons. It doesn't have a website. It's, they just own the trademarks and have leased them to RTC. They're not on any paperwork, exactly as you say, to protect that organization. CST would be very hard to get on any docket. But RTC, clear as day. And I really struggle to see how a court can't find that RTC and Dave Miscavige are running the show. When it comes to the UK, they have an added layer of complexity in their corporate structure, because the UK is run through COSRECI, the Church of Scientology Religious Education College Incorporated. We've talked about it before, which is an Australian registered non-profit, which on paper has absolutely nothing to do with CSI, RTC, or anything, other than the fact that it borrows $100 million from CSI, from FLAG, from the US-based organisations, so that it can escape paying corporation tax because it's not a charity in the UK. So on paper, they are separate organisations. And so if you were to sue COSRECI, it would be very hard to prove or to get RTC on the paperwork. But that's really important to do because it's designed to fall on the sword. So if you were to sue COSRECI and were to win or have a huge settlement or whatever, you get a big amount of money, they would just close the company down, and therefore COSRECI doesn't exist anymore. They're bankrupt. They don't have any money, so they can't pay the penalty. Sorry, because they're $100 million in debt. They don't have any money anyway on paper. But we know in actual fact, Dave Miscavige is flying around in Tom Cruise's private jet, and they're buying properties for millions of dollars, and not paying their staff. It's all just a corporate shell designed to confuse and muddy the waters to escape accountability. It's a very smart thing that they've done, and you can tell they put a lot of money and effort into setting this up in this way. I just hope that one day a court can see this and see through their corporate veil.
I mean, that's something I've been saying a long time, is that American courts, at least, I don't know about English courts, but American courts are just literally not set up to deal with an organization like this. I mean, even when you're dealing with, a big polluter or something over here, at some point they kind of make the calculus and decide, okay, let's settle these things. Scientology doesn't do that. I mean, they just go scorched earth all the way. Every appeal they possibly can. Their litigation budget is unlimited. They do this. They do the craziest things, like, when Monique sued, they tried to get her attorney, Ray Jeffrey, disqualified. And I remember how outraged he was. He said, I've been practicing law for 30 years and nobody's ever questioned my credibility before. But that's what they do. They just, and the courts just seem like, especially something that calls itself a church, they're not prepared to deal with such a bad actor, an organization that just does nothing but lies. And I don't know. I think there are a couple of courts that have sort of figured things out. And actually, the one that Leah is in right now, I think she's in a good court. Leah's case was appealed, this preliminary ruling that Scientology doesn't like. Leah doesn't like it either. They're both appealing it. That was appealed to the Second Appellate Division of California's appeal courts. That is the same division that overruled the arbitration ruling in the Danny Masterson civil lawsuit. The victims of Danny Masterson were told that they were going to have to go through arbitration, but that court looked at it more carefully and said, no, they might have signed contracts when they were Scientologists, but they're alleging that you're harassing them now that they're no longer in the church. I mean, just that, it was so amazing to see a court really dig into things and look at Scientology. So many of them don't. So that's the court that Leah's in right now. So I think she will get a fair hearing about this particular issue, and we'll get her response to Scientology's appeal brief probably in about a month or so. And that'll be interesting to see. And she's got a really great new attorney, this guy, Daniel Saunders. I have high hopes that he's going to do something really good. So, look, I know it's a tough time for Leah personally. She really took Mike's loss very hard. I think it's been difficult for her in her personal life. But she's got some good legal help with her, and all of us are pulling for her, right? Right, Alex?
Yeah, absolutely. She's got a whole army of us standing there with her on the sidelines, cheering her on. One thing I just want to note is I don't know what it's like in the States, but in the UK, there have been a large number of changes to company legislation recently in an effort to clamp down on Russian oligarchs and overseas entities and organizations that are shell companies set up by Russians because of the sanctions and all of this. So because of that, there's a lot of new laws around beneficial ownership. So if a company is actually controlled by somebody, whether or not they're on the paperwork, whether or not they hold shares, it's irrelevant. Company law in the UK now requires an organization to register who the person that is actually in charge of an organization is, if it's not the directors who are on the paperwork. This came into effect as I say, to try and crack down on Russian oligarchs, but it applies to every company. And this is something that's going to present a huge problem for Scientology because they are in a position now where either they have to admit that Dave Miscavige and RTC are in control of the UK organisation, or they don't do that. And at which point it's only a matter of time before someone takes them to court, points this out, and they get in big trouble for it. I don't know what the legislation is like in the US, but I do hope that Leah's legal team are looking at these things that aren't set up to go after Scientology. It's to do with Russian money and all of that, but it could apply because it is an international organization with a corporate veil.
I mean, we have seen some new laws here about being able to file sexual assault claims years afterwards. There have been some changes here that also I think, made it vulnerable for Scientology. But it just seems to me, in case after case, they just find these ways to convince these courts that they are this church that shouldn't be targeted. Especially with this arbitration thing that's been driving us crazy for 10 years now. It's just so unfair what's happened to Val Haney and Valeska Paris. And, I think they're going to, any former Scientologist who sues is going to face that. And we'll see, uh, hopefully in the Jane Doe 1 case, we almost had a wonderful ruling by an American judge who was about to rule that Scientology's arbitration scheme was inherently unfair, and Miscavige came in and got that judge removed before he could make that ruling final, which is just incredible. But that doesn't mean the next judge that replaced him isn't going to get that opportunity, and it's just taking time to get to that point. So there's hope there that maybe the arbitration thing may come to an end before too long. But it's been tough going in American courts. Like I said, a lot of these judges just don't seem very curious about Scientology or how it works. And some of the best rulings of all time all come out of England with judges that really did care and really looked into it. I mean, like, for example, what was the one, Judge Lady? Was that his name?
Yeah.
From the 70s? That was an incredible case. I think that was one that John Atack worked on.
Yeah. I've had extensive conversations with John Atack about the legal history, and yeah, Lord Justice Leahy in the 1980s, it was ruled that Scientology is a dangerous, harmful organization that is out to capture people, especially vulnerable children. But and also you have the 1970s, the Foster Report, a government inquiry which found the practice of Scientology is damaging to the mental health of its adherents, and it should be regulated because it amounts to a form of psychotherapy. Nonetheless, it hasn't stopped them from continuing to operate, continuing to abuse people to this very day. Nothing about Scientology has changed since it set up shop in 1959. Obviously, there are new policies, new leadership, but in terms of the actual practice and the effect it has on people, it hasn't changed. And it's about time that the government steps in and does something about it.
Well, and I think it's a good time for the government to step in. I wish they would. If we gave L. Ron Hubbard a great birthday present, it was this morning at the underground bunker. Thank you to the reader who gave us a report about what it's like out in Long Island, New York. Look, Long Island should be a hotbed for this kind of thing. Are you kidding me? And they're raising money for an ideal org. They spent $15 million for this big office complex that they want to turn into an ideal org. But what's the actual org there like now? Well, one of our folks went by, and I mean, it was pathetic, wasn't it, Alex?
Two staff members. It was like Sunderland Org when I visited with Jeff Beaumont from Canada, which had three staff members on its bloody org board, and they've got this multi-million-dollar property around the corner. It's a really sad state of affairs. Now, when you're in Scientology and you go to these big international events where Miscavige is showing all of these wonderful videos of these orgs being really busy and this massive expansion, you think that it's just your org that isn't expanding. You're sat there thinking, wow, look at all these orgs doing it right and expanding. We are really at the forefront of everything. It's just my org. We're just not doing a good enough job. It's just us that are quiet. Nobody realizes that no, it's actually every single org is quiet. Every single org has a couple of staff members. Yeah, there are some that are bigger, Paris, London, plenty in America, Tampa, and LA have, perhaps 50 or 100 staff members. None of them are as busy as they make out in these events, but it's these site reports that give us a real insight into the state of affairs. And it just goes to show, when you look at the Ideal Org program, when you spend lots of money on a building, it's not just about renovating it and putting new furniture in and making it look ideal. The point is, you can't open an Ideal Org without 86 staff members. And that's the thing that held Paris back. That's why Paris was delayed, was because they were ready to open, but they didn't have enough staff. So even though they have this multi-million-dollar building round the corner that's probably ready to go, or if they need to do some renovations, cool, maybe you got 6 months or a year or whatever, you're still looking a decade down the line of intense recruitment, because how are you going to find 86 staff members when you've currently only got two? You don't even have 86 members of the public going to
Right.
the to recruit in the first place.
Well, let me ask you something. If I did have 84, or if Paris had 84, what's what's the reasoning that it needs 86? What is it? What is the magic sort of line there? Is that just an arbitrary thing that David Miscavige came up with, or is there some magical formula? What is it, Alex?
I haven't got a Scooby. I think it probably, correct me if I'm wrong, anyone watching this that, was higher up in Scientology than I was. I don't know. My guess is that it's to do with an ideal org ideally operates on a certain basis. So there are a certain number of key positions that are filled. And in order for an org to really run fluidly, it should have these particular posts filled. You should have this number of auditors. You need to have an executive in each division. You have to have this number of staff members in each department, and that is the minimal operating standard in order to have a reasonably functioning org. And I think that just result that the number ended up being 86. The minimum number of staff an org can have is 3. If you have less than 3 staff members, you are officially not an org. So
Well, we just busted Long Island then, because they've only got
exactly,
2.
exactly, which is just hilarious. But again, it's off policy to close an org. So there's no way they're going to come in and go, you've only got 2 staff members, you're closing down, because they're desperate. They need the orgs to be there and they need those 2 people to work really hard. But you can be sure, and those 2 staff members will be under a lot of pressure from up lines to at least recruit just one more person. Come on.
Let alone 86, right?
Yeah.
Well, Freedom Medal of Valor asked who paid for that $15 million office building. I don't know, but I would wager that the top names who donated that money were Steve Fabos, because he's been very active with Long Island, and Tom Cummins. Tom Cummins and Victoria. They just put out a little thing about Victoria that I had not seen before. I knew that they've donated something like 55 million to the IAS because of Impact Magazine and the trophies and stuff. But in this new little notation I saw, they said that they've donated 60 million to Ideal Orgs. 60 million to Ideal Orgs. So I would bet that some of the money for Long Island came from Tom and Victoria Cummins, Steve Fabos, Trish Duggan. I mean, the usual names are the folks that they're getting this money from. I don't know who the whale is in Long Island. Maybe one of you knows and will let us know. But it's just amazing that they keep, trying to open these things up, and they are going to. I mean, Puerto Rico's ready. The one in South Africa in Port Elizabeth is ready. And I think there's another one now that I just saw something about that looks like it's getting ready. So I think Dave's going to go on another grand opening spree here pretty soon.
Well, you know who else is funding these ideal orgs that I think is really important to point out? You, as a US taxpayer, because
Yeah,
Scientology, while it's tax exempt, is using its tax free dollars. So you are subsidizing this, every American citizen, whether you like it or not. So who's funding it? You are, whether you like it or not.
I know it's incredible, and I've tried to point that out to people that well, just because they get a tax break doesn't mean that I'm paying for it. No, you're paying for it. Your
That's
taxes are
exactly what
paying.
it means. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. No, I agree with you, Alex. I think American taxpayers are helping David Miscavige out. Imagine if they lost their tax exempt status tomorrow. All right, people. One result of that would be that some of these millionaires would have a harder time donating to them because they wouldn't be able to write it off on their taxes. But what I think would be a much more ruinous bill would simply be the property tax on all of these buildings they own around the world. Imagine them having to suddenly pay property tax on Tampa and Phoenix and Japan. I mean Tokyo, and I mean, oh my goodness, it would just be incredible.
I mean, Scientology have billions of dollars in the bank. You know, the last calculation that was done was about 10 years ago. I think it was Jeffrey Augustine, worked out that the net book value is about 3 billion. If you adjust that for inflation, it's more like 5 or 6 billion now. And that's not including any growth in the last 10 years. So, you know, it is more likely $6 to $8 billion in the bank, as a rough guess. That's a lot of money, but that will very quickly be eaten up if they suddenly have to pay thousands of dollars for these 50, 60,000 square foot buildings in prime real estate locations all over the world, plus all these big lawsuits. That's why fundraising is so important for Scientology, and that's also why their tax exemption is something they fought so hard for. Their tax bill, my understanding, in the 1990s was $1 billion, and that's
Right.
why had to fight for IRS exemption, because if they didn't get it, they would go bankrupt.
Right. No, that was Marty Rathbun. That's what he said on Going Clear was that, Hubbard managed to get tax exempt when Hubbard declared it a church in 1953. The first actual physical building was in LA in 1954. The one in DC that they call the original wasn't. It was in 55. It opened up. Um, and never paid taxes. Well, then he managed to get tax exempt status. But then they lost it in 67 because the government did an investigation and said that it was all going to Hubbard. You can't have a nonprofit that benefits one man. And so Scientology lost its tax exemption in 1967. But as they explained in Going Clear, that doesn't mean they started paying their bill. They never paid taxes after 67. So by the late 80s, that tax bill was up to about $1 billion. And Marty said that they had about a quarter of that in assets, so that if they had to pay the bill, it'd be over. And that's why they fought so hard to get tax exempt status in the late 80s and early 90s, and they got it in 93. Because it would have put Scientology out of business if the IRS had not caved, and the IRS caved. So yeah, and I think the most valuable thing from that was what Lawrence Wright said. It's not just the money, it's the protection. And you see it in court every single time they come in. The first thing they say is, "Hey, we're a tax exempt church. We have the right to do this and that and the other thing." And it works in the courts. I mean, the courts are just really reticent to look at what a church does at all. So,
That's why I focus so hard in the work that I do on separating the belief from the behavior and saying, hey, look, irrelevant of, irrespective of whether this is a religious organization or not, they are abusing people. And in the US, yes, the tax exemption gives them some, you know, a scapegoat, some protection. But the point is, even if their tax exemption was revoked tomorrow, look at their history. That doesn't mean Scientology are going to actually start paying taxes. They didn't pay taxes for decades because they
no, they
were,
never will.
And so they never will. So yes, it's important to get their tax exemption revoked, but it's also important to make sure that the judicial system are aware, no, this is a harmful organization abusing people. And if you go after them for that, and the tax thing, you have a double whammy, and it's only a matter of time. It's a ticking time bomb.
Well, another reason why I like this Long Island report, and it did make me think of your Sunderland report, because you looked at the org board and saw 3 people. This person saw the Long Island org board and saw 2 people. Is it tells me that, look, the government has not done its job, and it doesn't look like they're going to be doing much of a job in the next few years either here in the U.S. But the rest of us are doing our job, right? We are telling people about the controversies and the abuses of the Church of Scientology, and guess what? People don't want to join it. And I think it's really because of people like you and Leah Remini and the work that everybody's doing, and making fun of things. I mean, that was I'm one of the few people, I'm sure, who really enjoys looking at L. Ron Hubbard's old lectures, because to me, especially the early lectures, I see a guy making fun of his own audience, right? He was ridiculing them, and they just stoked it up. I know that the people will say, well, L. Ron Hubbard was this incredible charismatic figure. I don't know. I listen to the tapes, and I don't hear a charismatic guy. I don't know. I guess you had to be there, but if you just read, especially if you just read the words, he was seeing how far he could push these people into just ludicrous ideas, and they just sucked it up. What is it about people that they do that, Alex?
I don't know. I think it's really hard. I mean, without ever knowing Hubbard personally, it's hard to answer. But I think it's important to note that it's not just about him being a charismatic leader. It's the coercive control, it's the manipulation, it's the tall stories, it's the ability to captivate your imagination and get you to believe, even just a little bit, that there is a slight bit of hope that this guy might actually know what he's talking about. And so once you've got that, you're in. And that's the little hook. So, it's sell these people a piece of blue skies. John Atack's book is based on a quote from Hubbard. Hubbard was the sort of guy that said, "Hey, just give me a chance. Just try. Just try this one little thing and see if it works." And once you accept that little offering, they've got you. And the way they do that is by finding your ruin, and they get you in a vulnerable moment and going, "Look, what is it that you hate about yourself? What do you want to change about your life? What's really upsetting you?" When you're in that effect state, when Hubbard comes along and says, "Hey, just try this," you go, "Okay, I'll give it a go. What's the harm done?" And suddenly you're in.
Well, you're so likable, Alex. I can imagine that if you came up to me when you were in Div 6, you might have had some effect on me.
I was good. What can I say? And that's why I'm trying so hard to, not make amends, but make up for the damage. A lot of people I recruited into Scientology are still being in. I didn't realize I was abusing and harming these people. And that's why it's important to speak out and say, look, I thought I was helping. I fully believed in it. And this is how I would talk to people when I was in Scientology. It's like, look, irrespective of what you've read on the internet or seen in the media, right? I've been in Scientology for a long time, and I've never read anything about Xenu. Why don't you just give it a go? Buy a book. You don't even have to try a course. Just buy the book. It's 13 quid. Read it, right? And see what you think. Come back to me in a week. And if anyone ever comes up to you and tries to disconnect from your family or force you to have an abortion or any of this other stuff, or you see anything in there about Xenu, I'll stand up, put my hands up, and you can tell me I'm wrong and I'll admit to it. This is the sales tactic that has been drilled into me and everybody else in Div 6. And this is why it's so manipulative, because you are trying to plant a seed of doubt in someone's brain.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I can see you being very effective at it.
I'm glad I'm out now and I can see how it works, Like at the time, I didn't realize that the sales tactic is based on manipulation. You're manipulating people's thought processes and trying to exploit their vulnerabilities in order to present Scientology as a solution. But actually, it's not a solution to anything. It's the cause of a lot of people's problems.
Well, the latest victims are right about now gathering at Ruth Eckerd Hall in Clearwater, getting ready for a big night. And I'm going to be very curious to see who shows up. The last few L. Ron Hubbard birthdays have produced some really interesting people showing up. Michael Pena, who I had not, the only other thing I'd ever seen him, he was at a Celebrity Center gala 10 years ago. And then I hadn't seen him at anything. And then he was at L. Ron Hubbard birthday. Well, Pena's one of the people who has moved from Hollywood to Clearwater, from California to Florida. So he showed up a couple of years ago. I thought that was interesting. But then last year, the one that blew my mind was to see Elizabeth Moss very pregnant in the front row with John Travolta giving David Miscavige a standing ovation. I think that's huge. And I don't know if we'll get to see something like that this year. They'll have the party tonight, and then in a week or two, they'll put out the press release and we'll scan it and see what we can find. But that was the big reveal last year. With all the people they've lost, from Leah Remini to Beck to Laura Prepon, who all said that they've left, to the people who've died, like Chick Corea and Kelly Preston and Kirstie Alley. It looks to me like maybe they're grooming Elizabeth Moss to be the next big face of Scientology. I mean, that's a big deal that she's in the front row at the L. Ron Hubbard birthday, don't you think?
Yeah, absolutely. And it will be interesting to see who shows up this year. And I cannot wait. My favorite thing when these photos come out is to zoom into the background and see the dozens of empty rows. If Scientology is expanding at the rate David Miscavige says it is, why are there empty seats in a 2,000 seat auditorium? Like,
Yeah.
surely that thing should be packed to the brim, and they've never filled up that stadium as far as I'm aware. And
Well,
would have thought if it's expanding, they would have had to get a bigger and bigger venue every year.
well, that's
Get
that's
the whole
exactly the
thing in.
point. Is if they've got millions of people, why do they have one of their most important events of the year every year at a 2,100 seat venue? If they had millions of passionate, members, you'd think they could fill the Rose Bowl or something.
Outside of Scientology, my work is in music festivals and music venues, right? So I spend a huge proportion of my time in these big stadiums and at these venues that seat, 20,000 people, 50,000 people, 100,000 people. And there is always an element of my brain when I'm standing there seeing all of this sea of people. And I find it hilarious because I think Scientology wouldn't be able to fill up this stadium for one night. And this artist is playing 3 nights here and then doing it in every city in the world. It's really funny when you put it into context like that.
Well, like I said, I'm really looking forward to what they put together, and I'm sure they're going to have a fabulous night tonight. I don't know, the birthday event is when they used to have Dan Sherman come out and give a biographical sketch about some particular part of L. Ron Hubbard's life. I'm sure they still do it, but I don't know who does it. I'd like to find out. Is it just Miscavige himself presenting that now? But they did put some wild stuff in that. That's supposed to be tonight. And then I guess the other big thing is, birthday game. Can you tell me a little bit about what birthday game was like for you at London Org?
Yeah, I mean, so the birthday game, for those of you who don't know, the story is that once L. Ron Hubbard said, someone asked him what he wanted for his birthday, and he said, "Oh, no, I've got everything I could possibly want. I just want the best gift you could give me is the expansion of Scientology." So thus started the birthday game. All of these orgs compete with each other to try and sell the most books or deliver the most auditing hours. There's a whole point system. And the whole idea is trying to make it a little bit fun, make it like a game. Salvaging people's humanity. Yeah, what a game. But no, so these orgs compete, and I don't know who's going to win this year. It'll be interesting to see. But what is also fun is they very rarely actually publish the stats. If you're there at the event, they play all these videos and they show these big flashy graphics that say London Org sold 10x the books they sold last year, but they never say they sold 500 books, right?
Right,
Because that
right.
will show how small Scientology really is. And they certainly don't release those stats online or anywhere outside of that hall. They do. There are a few that kind of seep through the woodwork, but it'll be interesting to see.
Well, Alex, thank you very much. We're just experimenting with this new form, Substack Live Video. Hope it went well for everybody. I'm going to release this to everybody, all of our 15,000 overall subscribers tomorrow at noon so everybody can see how it went. I hope the video was clear. I hope the sound was clear. We're just trying this out, people. We're doing the best we can.
It
And
looks like
next
there's
week,
some good engagement. There's some great questions and comments and stuff I've been keeping an eye on as we've been going through. It's
oh,
great.
okay, good, good. Um, I hope next week I'm going to be back to a regular group therapy the way it usually is, and I'll try to use this video in some other ways. We'll find something. But thank you, Alex. I knew I could count on you. You're the best, man.
Thank you. It's an honor to be chosen out of everyone that takes part in group therapy. Just me. Wow. I hope I haven't disappointed. Thank you so much.
All right, we'll talk to you later, everybody.